Most people think of their shadow as the worst part of them. But what if your shadow is simply the part of you that hasn't been welcomed yet? Welcome, everybody, to Unfiltered Soul Shifts. Today, I'm diving straight into it. We are going to be touching base on shadow work. It's not the bad, the messy, broken part of you. It's actually the unseen, unprocessed, unmet parts of your humanity, right? So, how are we going to integrate this? Where do we start? What is shadow work? Starting at the beginning, trying to explain it as simply as possible, because it was also something that I used to grapple with, and many of us still do. Right? He has been termed the father of shadow work, would be Carl Jung, and he defined the shadow as conscious of the disowned aspects of your personality, such as repressed emotions, desires, flaws. Now, shadow work involves bringing these elements into consciousness to achieve wholeness and individuation, right? So it's not just the negative. Shadow also contains talents that we haven't explored, creativity, energy, and it's integrating all of these parts. So parts work, it's crucial, often spiritual, and it's the journey towards self-awareness, which should be a deeply spiritual goal. Integration of your wholeness. So, in other words, focusing on accepting all aspects of self, both the light and the shadow. Very similar to contemplative traditions of your early mystics. And then obviously the power of the shadow. So that the shadow holds immense transpersonal energy. So when integrated, this energy can foster personal growth, spiritual maturity, and we start moving away from a rigid persona, the mask that we show to the world, towards a more genuine connection with yourself, with your soul, and with spirit. Now, when you begin to delve into shadow work and really start to personalize it, to start integrating, others may start to perceive you as more authentic, grounded, emotionally mature, but they also might find you more challenging to interact with as you set stronger boundaries, because you are integrating all of these parts of yourself and your personality, and your behaviors might start shifting from people pleasing to being a tad more direct and honest. So, what is shadow work? In a nutshell, the shadow equals disowned parts of yourself. Not only negative traits, society has been conditioned to think of the shadow as dark, as black, as evil, negative. And it's not. Shadow is also power, it's also assertiveness, it's your needs, and it's voice. All these latent aspects that are formed through your upbringing, social conditioning, or need for survival. What we bury, what we feel, isn't safe to express. Those are the shadow parts. Now, I often see shadow work as something done in parts, right? And when I mention parts here, I'm indirectly speaking about parts integration, right? So parts work, but also sections like part one, this is the change that has happened, part two, part three. Now, the initial shift, so the initial part that I see, it also speaks to this theory, is often early days we start seeing in others what we haven't integrated. So now you start doing all this work, and in the people that you surround yourself, you start seeing those aspects that you haven't fully integrated. And this could be good or bad, right? It might be going out somewhere with a bunch of friends and you pick up that, sure, one of your friends is just really, really confident. Or it could be sitting and having a conversation and you realize, sure, this one friend is actually very ego orientated. So that's what I meant. It could be good or bad. And essentially, the emotional charge equals an internal signal. So you noticing that is actually your internal signal to say, hey, why does this bother me? Question it. And also, where does this live in me? Now, very often we associate that emotional charge as a trigger, but a trigger isn't, again, doesn't have to be something negative. It's a signal that should precede a question. So, again, where does this bother you and where does this live in you? An example: judgment towards selfish people often masks as unmet needs or a lack of boundaries. So it's in this initial shift that one becomes less predictable. You start recognizing your triggers. Others might notice a change in your usual persona. You become less people pleasing because all of these previously repressed anger or needs may start to come out, right? You start expressing them, which can be perceived as difficult to define. Increase authenticity. Others may just notice you no longer playing a role or wearing a mask to gain approval, or your emotional intensity. So, as you start confronting your shame, your fear, your anger, you may appear more emotionally volatile, which makes others uncomfortable. And it's in that uncomfort that we start to heal. But sometimes it's that healing that feels confrontational to others. And it's because we're meeting our shadow, which means our identity is changing. Why does this feel confronting? It's because we start seeing anger, we start seeing the grief and the envy and the need for control in ourselves, and it can feel very destabilizing. But it's that awareness that is not regression, that is the middle phase, where we start being aware and we start setting boundaries. Now, as you start to integrate your shadow, you learn to start honoring your needs, which leads to changes in how you start handling your relationships. These may lead to stronger boundaries. Now, remember, boundaries can also be perceived as negative because very often those that see it as negative because they are losing access to a part of you that is now changing, or a part of you that no longer exists. So others may perceive you as less available or more assertive as you stop overextending yourself to meet other people's expectations. Reduce projection. So instead of blaming others for your issues, you take responsibility for your own emotions. And this makes others see you as mature, less reactive. And this middle phase also then starts bringing an improved cycle of communication because you're not acting out of unconscious, unhealed wounds. Your communication basically becomes more transparent, less passive aggressive, and less emotionally charged. Now, it's important just to remember that you still need to be compassionate with yourself and others because it's that compassion that helps you integrate. Compassion is not about fixing, not about fixing yourself and fixing others, but it's also not about suppressing. It's not spiritual bypassing. Compassion is the bridge between the two. And this is where the third part comes in. So the long-term results, right? Where we are trying to aim towards being integration and wholeness. Now, once you've started and once you've integrated these shadow aspects, now remember, you don't just move through the different parts. It's not like, oh, tick, I've moved through stage 1 and tick, I've moved through stage 2. Very often we regress in order to progress, right? Be compassionate with yourself, because sometimes more parts work, or some parts of your shadow require more work than others. But once you've integrated or started integrating these aspects, others start often seeing you as more grounded, compassionate, authentic, and you start feeling it in your soul, in your spirit. You start becoming less judgmental, really just because you've accepted your own darker side, and then you in turn become less critical of others' flaws. You're calmer and you're more understanding. You might be appearing more confident as you stop hiding parts of yourself. You're also showing up more confidently, which others may perceive as stronger sense of self. Others may perceive as sense of ego. And ultimately, you are a different person because you are no longer reacting from wounds. Now, these wounds could be childhood wounds, they could be adult wounds, or repressed emotions. You may feel and be perceived as a completely different or more holistic person. So, a prompt that I want you to start practicing is, what part of me am I meeting through this trigger? Another prompt that might be easier, especially when it comes to journaling, is when you unpack your day. Think about items of your day that just irritated you, right? Now, remember again, a trigger doesn't have to be something dramatic. It could just be a frustration, an irritation. What irritated you today? And in that irritation point, what might it be pointing to within you? I start noticing emotional spikes. And when you do, name the feeling, call it out. That's part of the work. So, in closing, while deep work leads to better relationships, it can also cause friction in others that are used to your old, compliant, and passive patterns. The change in your behavior can challenge their own comfort zones. Remember, your shadow is not your enemy. It's a part of you that is waiting to come home. Until next time, beautiful souls.